Hello, welcome back. Sean here, Mountains Garage. We gotta hurry. I've only got like 10 minutes before my buddy shows up to take my bead roller away. My beloved bead roller that I've had in my possession for I don't even know how long. Long before I had this garage. It was clogging up my other garage. Long before I dreamed of motorizing it, buying accessories, and learning anything about it other than just being a tool that I could dent metal with. So, let's take a look at the one that's going away, and in the next video, we'll see the questionable choices I made replacing it. Before my beloved bead roller goes away, where it will live on a farm and it can run free, it's actually going to my buddy's house and I can still use it anytime I want. Let's go over the highlights of what I like about it, why I kept it, and why I feel there's areas I could improve upon. So the bead roller itself, the project, I never finished it. I never took it apart and painted it. So it's the stand, which you can't see, is a Model A wheel, 1930 Model A Ford AA wheel. I made the stand. It's actually on a receiver hitch, so you could take it off the stand and put it in the receiver hitch like I have on my bench, my big fabrication bench. So the blue part is what I had originally. It is rugged. It's not flexible like the cheap ones that you buy made out of 1/2-inch plate, where the C will actually open up when you put stress on it. And this was originally a hand crank bead roller. Well, there was a winter when I was recovering from an illness and didn't feel like doing anything else. But messing around with bead rollers was a good pastime. So I found, originally I bought a motor online, a gear reduction motor that was 110 volt, and it didn't work. It was too weak, too fast. Lots of reasons why it didn't work. I ended up finding this Dayton, which is Granger, gear reduction motor, but it was 90 volt. I knew nothing about 90 volt motors, but thank you Amazon and eBay, I found a household current, 110, 115 to 90 volt speed control, so that reduced my voltage. This is a forward and reverse drum switch. This is a Harbor Freight. You just plug it in line with your cord that goes to the wall. Foot switch, so this is just on and off. It's not variable, but my speed is variable here. And it works fantastic. I have stated in the past, and I'll state it again now, this is considered a professional bead roller only because the bead roller dies have a 3/4 inch bore. The shafts are reduced down, or these are actually 3/4 all the way through. Your cheaper bead rollers, the 1/2-inch plate versions, and more than half available, and you have to be careful when you're buying stuff, those are 22 millimeter, which is sometimes called 7/8 of an inch, but technically those are called 22 millimeter dies, and those dies are a lot less expensive. You can get a package of 6 for $100, where the professional ones are $100 a set. So after I built 2 bead rollers during that winter 4 or 5 years ago, 3 or 4 years ago, whenever it was, time flies, you know, I sold the one that took the 22 millimeter dies. I had bought every die known to man. I had painted the whole thing, the famous in my mind Christmas Eve orange paint debacle where the can of paint fell out of my Suburban and blew up in my face. That was a nice looking unit, and I sold it with everything and concentrated on this one and never really finished it. So I was dedicated to the 3/4 ID dies. I bought $1,200 worth, which was 10 dies, I think. And they showed up and they were poorly made. The bore was slightly larger than 3/4, so they wobbled when you tighten them up with a set screw. I had to install my own set screws because that's something I don't like about this bead roller. The dies have a hole bored in them and with a set screw. That's what holds it on the shaft. Most other bead rollers, and the setup that I prefer and was going to convert this to, have an Allen screw in the end with a washer, and the bead roller die just slips over the shaft and you tighten that up, and some still have a set screw just to keep it from spinning on the shaft, but a much more secure way of keeping the dies in line when you're using it. This has a depth stop, homemade, that you can move back and forth. I'll show you the back side. When I got it, there was already a yardstick cut down and riveted onto it. The guy I got this from built stock cars way back. It's a really rugged unit. And this piece of aluminum channel I got from a buddy of mine, I have more of them, my new bead roller, will feature this tiny little table. You could build an elaborate table, which is probably super nice, but I find this really handy just with its size. You can easily, it gives you something to rest on while you're trying to just follow the lines. And you can freehand stuff like my shields I put over the Lovejoy coupler on my right hand drive 90-volt motor. I just got a Lovejoy coupler. Those are available in different shaft IDs as well. I think the motor was 5/8 and my shafts were 3/4. So I just bought a 5/8 Lovejoy on one end, the metal part of the coupler, and a 3/4 in the other, and there was a rubber, drive cushion in between. Really simple setup. Made a bracket to hold it, and I was off to the races. It works really well. When you're shopping for bead rollers, be aware of what thickness they can run a bead in. This one is unknown, but the ones you buy is typically what motor it has on it. Now you take Mittler Brothers, one of the nicest bead rollers out there, and also the most expensive. They have two versions. They have a homeowner unit, which has a right angle drive motor similar to this, and those start in the $1,200 range, and those are rated for 19 gauge, which is 40 thousandths, give or take. They sell the identical bead roller, and they come in different throat depth. This is a 24-inch bead roller, pretty popular. 36 is the next. In theory, this is 24, so you could take a 4x8 sheet and run a bead down the middle. I never do that, and my replacement bead roller is only an 18-inch throat, hoping to take up less space overall. This thing's almost 4 feet long. So Mittler Brothers also sells the same bead roller with their industrial motor, they call it, and the motor is straight off. That's how you can tell the difference, that and the price. So the motor's not at a right angle, it's straight off, and that is around starting at $1,800, and it's rated for 16 gauge. So I don't know if I'd ever run a bead in something that thick. 18 gauge is a pretty popular spec, and my new one is rated for 18 gauge, but I still believe that's mostly how much the motor will turn the dies. I don't think, in this case, this thing is massive square tubing. I don't think you're going to flex it that much or hurt anything, but I don't know how they do the ratings or if they're even somewhat standard. I'm now behind the camera with the volume turned down, hoping it solves my audio problem. Here's a view of the drum switch and the speed control. I didn't cover the tension adjustment or the depth of the bead adjustment. I installed this wheel, so it's super handy. And when you actually are running beads, you go down to, you touch the metal, and then you determine maybe you want to go a full turn. That'll, you start pushing the metal down, turn and a half, and then when you change positions, you just go back to where it touches the metal, and then you turn and a half or whatever your setting was, so all your beads look the same when you're done. This has a spring return, so when you're going counterclockwise, it's lifting the upper die. Your cheap ones just have a bolt shoving down on it, and you have to manually pick the shaft up. So when you're shopping, you want some kind of connection, so when you go counterclockwise, you're actually lifting the die. That makes life a lot easier. Again, this is my table, which is roughly lined up with the center of the dies. It's not critical to be spot on, but... And I put all these 5/16 bolts in to hold the dies that I bought, and then some, and I ended up sending them back because they were poorly made, and that company is now out of business. I just looked the other day. Let's go around the backside. Oh, well, I might as well show you the wheel while we're here. You know, the truck had 6 on it plus a few spares, and they're dangerous to actually put a tire on, but they make really good stands. But the stand is nothing but a receiver hitch, so again, I can stick that into my bench. That's the T-handle for the depth stop, so you can run a straight bead in something. If it has a flat edge, you can just run it along the depth stop. Works really well. This is the bracket I made. You can probably see the Lovejoy coupler right there. Yeah, you can. Just a couple Allen screws on the shaft. Really easy. Just had to line it up straight. And I drilled and tapped a few holes in my square tubing, made a few brackets. Nothing to it. I was always going to enclose this completely, but I just put this little shield on so you're not touching any live wires. And it's pretty structural with both brackets. Some pretty thick aluminum. Just stuff I had lying around. This is a 1/4 inch bead, round bead die. It's always been my go-to. It was the only one I had for a long, long time. I've had this bead roller for quite some time. With all the receiver hitches on my bench, and this as well, I always weld a nut and put a 1/2 inch bolt to take the slop out of the receiver hitch. You go grab the receiver hitch in your truck and it bounces up and down. You don't want whatever feature you have stuck in there, whatever tool, to be bouncing like that. I know somebody's going to want the specs off the motor, so if you're smart enough to flip this upside down, I just Googled 90 volt right angle drive motor and it came up on eBay and I bought it, hoping it would work. Again, I had already had one failure and this was a success. Trial and error. Coincidentally, that's the way life happens sometimes. At the end of the winter that I was messing with bead rollers, the self-contained bead roller drive systems that Eastwood Fab, Woodwood Fab, and others sell became popular. They weren't, the hand crank bead roller was pretty much the deal unless you were buying a really expensive professional one. And all of a sudden now you could, for $400 or $500, buy a self-contained kit that bolts on. Most of those are geared for the 22mm shaft bead rollers, but you could adapt if you had a 3/4 unit, or you could buy the Mittler Brothers drive, or there's others out there. So, you know, there's not that many places making bead rollers, but there's quite a few. Always let the buyer beware. If you study them, like the Woodwood Fab stuff, seems to be available in the unbranded version, sometimes significantly less money. Not to take any business away from Woodwood Fab. I actually bought, the one I bought is a Woodwood Fab, and we're going to see that in the next video. But when I was buying a tubing bender back in December, the Woodwood Fab tubing bender is available by the same part number anyway, unbranded, for a lot less money. All imported Chinese stuff, I'm aware, but it is what it is. So shop around, and hopefully armed with some of the knowledge I just gave you, you can make an informed decision. The one that I bought, that'll be featured in the next video from Woodwood Fab, is one I was curious about back a few years ago when I was messing with them, because it was both reasonably priced. It was 22mm shafts. It came with 6 dies. I hope, the same hope I had back then, I had it in my cart many times and almost bought it and built a 3rd one that winter. The drives weren't available yet, so I would have put my own drive on it, but now you can buy the drive that bolts right on it, the depth stop, the stand, you can buy it all. So, and that's what I did, so we're going to see that next.